Hello guys, welcome to part 2 of my build of this European house. You might remember that in a recent video I completed the initial build of this house, which was sent to me by Scale Models HQ. In this video I'm going to make a few upgrades to the kit, a few additions, and then do some painting and some weathering. And a quick reminder that if you do want any products from Scale Models HQ, you can use the discount code MN for Model Nerd 10 at checkout and you will get a 10% discount. So I concluded my previous video by saying that this kit was a good canvas on which to develop our own sort of model making, scratch building, creative skills, and that's what I'm hoping to do today. The first step was to secure that back wall together. It comes in 3 parts. I simply use a combination of some cocktail sticks running between the 3 parts to hold them in place, with of course some glue to make that bond more permanent. I use some gel super glue for all of the gluing in this video, and it doesn't seem to damage this particular type of foam. One of the obvious aspects of this building is that it doesn't have an interior, which leads us to the conclusion that we either have to blank out the windows, maybe put the shutters to be closed, or we have to build an interior. Actually, I'm going about halfway. I'm going to build a small amount of the interior, which will cunningly hide the rest of the interior from outside viewing. So the idea is that we'll be able to look through the door and through those 4 windows there, but what we will see will just be a corridor. To do that, I decided to add some wooden dowels as seating supports. So here I'm cutting some holes into the foam for that purpose. One of the fixes that I needed to make was this oddly thin door, and the easy solution for this was to take the piece of door frame from that strange half door on the right hand side, make the main door wider, and just cobble together a door frame from those 2 pieces. There we go, that looks better. It's probably not quite as wide as the door should be still, but it's not too bad. The kit provides us with some wood to act as the timbers around the outside of the house. Before sticking these on, I gave them a little bit of sandpaper treatment to rough them up a bit, and then I scraped a knife along the edges, again just to make them a bit less uniform and to make them look a bit more like real wood. I mean, they are real wood, but you know what I mean. Here are our 2 main sides stuck together, and you can see I've added all of those window frames and the various timbers and so on. And this is how the house will go together. So we have the back wall there with the chimney, and then the plain side wall. And here is my cunning plan for the interior. I'm going to take this spare piece of foam which was in the kit, place it to the left of the door like so, to create a corridor as you come in the main door. I'll use another piece of foam here to make the first floor, another piece for the first floor wall, and then another piece for the attic floor, and that's the critical one of course, because that's the one which will be seen through the broken roof. And that corridor will give us something to look at as we look through the 2 windows, but it will also have the nice effect of blanking off the rest of the house interior from view. I know that's not very realistic because it does mean that the rest of the rooms in the house have no access to any windows, but we'll just ignore that small fact for now. You can get a rough idea there of how that's going to be divided. Here's that bottom floor with the corridor wall in place. As you can see, I've got a door in it. I will put a door in there and keep it closed so you can't see through it. And we've got those 3 beams there to sort of support the ceiling. I didn't make the beams go the whole length of the building because they're not going to be seen. There wasn't enough spare foam in the kit, so I just used some pink foam that I had lying around. Here you can see me carving some floorboards into the first floor. I wasn't quite sure how these would turn out because the texture on the foam itself is heavier than I'm used to. I used a pin to make the nail marks. And if I put everything temporarily together, you can see here we've got the attic space floor. There will be a hole cut in here for some steps later. And as I rotate through the building, you can see into those two lots of corridor space. Another advantage of this approach is that I don't have to worry about stairs because I can imagine that they're in the rooms which I can't see into behind this corridor. I wanted to give the building a more damaged appearance, so I used some sculpting tools to make some random shapes in the foam and my craft knife to draw some brick lines inside those holes. You can't see that very well on the camera here, but hopefully this gives you a better view. I used my sculpting tools to reduce the uniformity of those bricks as best I could. I wasn't sure how I was going to approach the painting of the outside of the house, because I don't think the texture of the foam itself would really look good when painted. And in fact, foam like this doesn't take airbrushed paints very well at all. It takes a lot of paint coming from a lot of angles, and you still end up with foam showing through. So I thought I would experiment on the inside first of all, where it won't be seen so much, by using some plaster. I tried to get that as thin as possible, but of course you can always sand it down slightly afterwards if you need to. My only concern with the plaster is whether it would crack over time, and of course if it falls off and it reveals the blue foam underneath, that doesn't look good at all. Here's a good example of why I don't want to airbrush the bare foam. This is the pink foam. It's had a lot of Tamiya XF1 black on it, and as you can see there's still quite a lot of pink showing through. The second experiment I tried was to take some regular acrylic artist paints. These are not particularly expensive paints. Mix it with a bit of water but not too much and slap it on. And as I'm sure you can see here, that provided much better coverage. Once that was dry, I was able to effectively airbrush some Tamiya acrylics over the top. For the upstairs room I wanted some wallpaper, so I found a pattern which I thought was reminiscent of 1940s wallpaper. I scaled it down, printed it out in strips, then cut those strips out and glued them to the wall using PVA glue. I papered straight over the door, and then once everything was dry I cut the door back out. The plaster on the inside worked fairly effectively, and I knew that the foam wouldn't work effectively, so I began to apply plaster on the outside as well. I tried to avoid the small areas where I'd carved out bricks, but I wasn't very effective at doing that. The dried plaster did need some sanding. Even then it's not perfectly smooth, but I think that's entirely fine. This is supposed to represent a fairly old, slightly crumbling building, so I have no problems with that not being perfect. Here you can see the mini interior starting to take shape. And for some reason at this point I felt like the interior just wasn't going to work, so I decided obviously to leave it in place, but I closed most of the shutters. So one of those shutters is still open, you can have a peek inside, but you can't see too much through that individual window. Maybe in a future project when I've got some furniture that I can add and so on, I will do a house diorama with an interior. But for now it wasn't really clicking. I didn't really think it was going to work well. Maybe I was having a bad day because at this point I also decided that I didn't like the floorboards that I carved for the attic. So I grabbed some popsicle sticks, some ice lolly sticks. They're a little bit too thick, but we're not going to see them from the side. However, they are also a bit too deep, so I split them in two and cut some floorboards for those, and then glued them onto the previous carved floor. In a similar way to the foam, the plaster was given a base coat of thick black acrylic paint. And after a small amount of tidying up, I used some white, some dark sea grey and some buff to mix a base colour of paint which I airbrushed on. You can see here that when I removed the tape which I used when I was painting the wood, it pulled off the paint on the main building. Rather than paint everything again, I decided to use some more tape and spread this pattern all over the building and incorporate it as a happy accident. I think it looks quite nice and gives a bit more of a weathered effect. I thought this was a good time to use the metal stencils that I got from Scale Models HQ. These are for weathering or distressing paintwork. I've got a couple of these. This larger one is thinner and a bit more flexible, which means you do have to hold it down onto the surface a bit more tightly to get that nice crisp edge. This would be quite useful for vehicles, I think, because it would easily bend around curves. Whereas these grey coloured ones are much smaller, they're designed to be broken apart and used individually, but because they're a bit more rigid, you can just lay them on top of the surface and aim the airbrush at them. Here you can just about see the effects of some of that distressing technique with a lighter colour grey over the original base coat. One thing to remember when you're doing this is that the colours will blend during the weathering process, so you need to make the difference quite stark now so that it is still visible in the final result. I used some red and brown colours in acrylic paints to pick out individual bricks and give some variety to that brick wall. And then finally it was time to deal with the roof tiles. These tiles are not perfect, but they certainly look better on one side than the other. The gaps are much thinner on one side, so I made sure I laid them with those sides up. I wanted to reveal quite a lot of the lattice structure of the roof, and also that of course allows us to view into the attic space. So I went quite sparingly with the tiles. I also tried to break up those long runs, and I kept a few tiles left over for around the base of the building when it goes down on a diorama. Then I gave the roof a spray of Tamiya primer and a coat of NATO black. The wooden part was then picked out with XF52 Flat Earth. Then I returned once more to the artist's acrylic paints, this time mixing various grey colours and painting the slate roof. And at this point I'm going to call it an end for this video. I know I said earlier that I was going to weather the house in this video, but it's taken a bit longer than I thought to build and paint it. So this is our house so far. In the next video I will do the weathering process with some oil paints. Until then, I'd like to say a huge thank you to my Patreon supporters. These guys contribute to the channel every month and your help is really appreciated, guys. Thank you very much. And also thank you to Scale Models HQ for supplying the building and the weathering templates which I used in this video. And a reminder that you can get 10% off on their website by using the discount code which is on the screen now. And finally, thank you to all of you for watching this video, and if you enjoyed it, please consider liking and subscribing. I have a few more projects in the pipeline at the moment, so it hopefully won't be another 3 weeks before you see the next video. Thank you for watching, guys.